So we are back. The secret comeback of al-Qaeda. Terrified U.S. officials. Let's get it, man.
They were the most feared terrorist organization on Earth, the group that brought America to its knees. Then they vanished. At least that's what everyone thought. But they weren't gone, they were rebuilding in the shadows. This is the unbelievable story of how al-Qaeda collapsed and evolved into something even more dangerous. On September 11, 2001, two fireballs exploded across the New York skyline, and with them, al-Qaeda announced itself to the world in the most brutal way. By lunchtime, the entire world had changed. Nearly 3,000 people were dead. 19 terrorists armed with nothing but box cutters had hijacked 4 planes, bringing down the Twin Towers and carving a burning wound into American military power at the Pentagon. The impact on public consciousness was immediate. Within just a few weeks, about 90% of Americans could pick Osama bin Laden out of a lineup. His face was everywhere. Bin Laden had achieved what every terrorist dreams about. He became the center of the world's attention. And more importantly, he had proven that a relatively small organization could bring the world's only superpower to its knees. What happened next was something the world had never really seen in terrorism. Al-Qaeda stopped being just a group. It became a brand, a movement, and recruits rushed to join the fight. Between 1996 and 2001, more than 20,000 fighters cycled through al-Qaeda's training camps in Afghanistan. That's a small city signing up for a masterclass in bomb-making, guerrilla warfare, and the group's toxic, violent ideology. It was a machine built out of anger, ambition, and opportunity, and it was growing faster than anyone realized. The organization was pulling in young men from London, Paris, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, and dozens of other countries. A brain drain of talent, all buying what they saw as one-way tickets to the world's most important holy war. It was a global network of grievance, all channeled into a singular purpose by bin Laden's jihadi message. By 2010, the organization had formal affiliate groups in 7 different countries and active cells in dozens more. They had essentially franchised terrorism. Each affiliate ran with its own autonomy, but kept the al-Qaeda label and all the expertise and notoriety that came with it. And they were good at media and propaganda. Very good. Their production wing, As-Sahab Media, put out videos that had professional editing, graphics, music, and multilingual subtitles. They even launched an English-language magazine that looked slick and modern, filled with religious justifications for violence and step-by-step guides for building bombs. And it reached millions online. The content was professionally produced and designed to be spread as widely as possible. They understood something that a lot of other terrorist groups missed. In order to survive in the modern world, you need attention, and you need to control the narrative. Modern algorithms would have had their message amplified 1,000 times. For al-Qaeda, the battlefield wasn't just the desert or the mountains, it was also on the screen, and that was a battlefield they were winning. Even before 9/11, al-Qaeda was operating on an annual budget of $30 million. That money came from wealthy donors in Gulf states who funneled cash through charitable organizations and religious foundations. Some of these donors knew exactly what they were sinking their money into. Al-Qaeda had turned mosque donation boxes and Islamic charities into an international funding network. With that kind of money, they could operate like a real organization. They had accountants, logistics coordinators, even something resembling an HR department for recruiting and vetting new members. And al-Qaeda knew how to use its resources. Instead of funding large-scale attacks like 9/11, they shifted to inspiring, advising, and loosely enabling smaller extremist cells, operations that were cheap but had maximum impact. In Madrid in 2004, a locally radicalized criminal jihadi network bombed commuter trains, killing 193 people. Intelligence services later found the entire attack cost only about $10,000 to pull off. In London in 2005, homegrown extremists radicalized by al-Qaeda's global ideology carried out attacks on the underground, killing 52 and injuring 784 more. In Mumbai in 2008, a Pakistani militant group mounted a 3-day assault that killed 175 people. It demonstrated how cheaply well-trained extremists could paralyze a major city. These weren't random explosions, they were signals, proof that al-Qaeda's influence could extend through local groups. Some attacks they planned and directed themselves. Others were simply inspired from a distance. Sometimes they just cheered from the sidelines and claimed credit afterward. But they all sent the same message: nowhere, and nobody was safe. By the end of the 2000s, al-Qaeda had set the gold standard of global jihad. Every intelligence agency on the earth was obsessed with tracking them. They had reached a level of power, influence, and notoriety that made every previous terrorist group look like amateurs. And that is exactly when their world began to crumble. The United States and its allies wanted revenge. Operation Enduring Freedom kicked off in October 2001. At its peak, over 130,000 international troops were hunting al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. The Taliban regime that had been sheltering them collapsed in about 6 weeks. Suddenly, all of the training camps and safe houses al-Qaeda had spent years building were wiped out, and its leaders were scattered into the mountains of Pakistan. But the real game changer was the drone warfare revolution. In 2004, the U.S. carried out exactly 1 drone strike in Pakistan. By 2010, that number had jumped to 128 in a single year. From 2004 to 2018, 414 drone strikes killed an estimated 3,000 to 4,000 people. Hellfire missiles raining down from 30,000 feet became the new normal for al-Qaeda leadership meetings. Between 2001 and 2015, over half of all senior al-Qaeda leaders were killed. Were captured. Pakistan's tribal areas became a kill
Old
zone.
laptop.
There was basically nowhere left for
Let's go
al-Qaeda's
back.
leaders to operate without expecting a missile to find them. Then came May 2nd, 2011. Navy SEALs raided a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. Osama bin Laden, the face of global jihad, was dead. Al-Qaeda tried to push forward under Ayman al-Zawahiri, but he never had bin Laden's charisma. He could organize operations, but he couldn't inspire anyone. And when he was killed in July 2022 by an R-9X flying Ginsu, a missile that used blades instead of explosives, his death barely made the headlines. That alone shows how far al-Qaeda had fallen. And just when al-Qaeda was reeling, a louder and bloodier monster arrived. The true blow to al-Qaeda was competition. In June 2014, ISIS declared an Islamic caliphate and burst onto the world stage. At their peak, they controlled territory the size of the UK and were pulling in $1 to $2 billion annually from oil, taxation, and looted antiquities. In the space of 2 years, over 30,000 foreign fighters joined ISIS, dwarfing al-Qaeda's recruitment. ISIS had over 46,000 Twitter accounts, pumping out slick videos with video game aesthetics and meme warfare. The media couldn't get enough of ISIS. They were the new threat, al-Qaeda's scary younger brother. Meanwhile, al-Qaeda had gone from being the biggest danger in the world to yesterday's news. After watching bin Laden get killed and ISIS surge, al-Qaeda's remaining leadership made a critical decision. The old terrorist model, centralized leadership, spectacular attacks, and constant media presence had painted a massive target on their backs. So they did something counterintuitive: they decentralized. The shift was dramatic. Before 2011, bin Laden was releasing regular video messages, and al-Qaeda Central was micromanaging operations around the world. After his death, everything went dark. Public statements were replaced by encrypted messaging. Bin Laden had loved the camera. His successors learned to love the shadows. Autonomous operators shared the al-Qaeda brand, but made their own tactical calls. Regional leaders were given huge freedom, and Central Command became an advisory board. The new doctrine prioritized silent expansion over loud explosions. Instead of plotting the next big attack on the West, the focus shifted to embedding itself in local conflicts, and avoid doing anything that would bring American drones bombs to their doorstep. ISIS would make all the old mistakes, declaring victory too early and terrorizing too many locals. Al-Qaeda would do precisely the opposite. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't dramatic, but it worked. They started to take pages out of the Taliban's playbook. They controlled over half of Afghanistan with a strong hand, but provided services that the government couldn't or wouldn't. Al-Qaeda's branches adopted the same approach. In Yemen, AQAP set up courts that could resolve disputes in days, while government courts took years. In Mali and Burkina Faso, JNIM established functioning Sharia councils. The services expanded beyond justice. In Somalia, al-Shabaab began distributing grain and basic service, reaching almost 2 million people. Across every region, the pattern was the same. Where government stepped back, Al-Qaeda stepped in. They even adopted a marriage strategy. Al-Qaeda commanders in Mali married local women, creating tribal obligations and protection networks. It was all very logical, patient, and most importantly, deeply embedded. But the timeline shift was perhaps the most important. Different countries, different cultures, but the same slow burn strategy of embedding themselves into daily life. Al-Qaeda's branches were operating on 20-year plans. They learned the hardest lesson in asymmetric warfare. If you have time and your enemy doesn't, patience becomes your most powerful weapon. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, or AQAP, has been called the most dangerous Al-Qaeda affiliate by U.S. intelligence. And there's a good reason for that. They were behind the underwear bomber in 2009, the printer cartridge bombs in 2010, and the laptop bombs in 2017. They have repeatedly targeted Western aviation, and they're good at it thanks to bomb makers like Ibrahim al-Asiri, who pioneered non-metallic explosives before he was killed in 2018. Yemen's civil war, which started in 2014, created the perfect storm for AQAP. While the Saudis and Houthis have been fighting each other, AQAP has been operating in the chaos. At times, they have fought next to Saudi-backed forces against the Houthis without ever giving up their autonomy. At their peak around 2015, AQAP did something no other Al-Qaeda branch managed. They seized Mukalla, Yemen's largest seaport and the surrounding city. They quickly turned it into a jihadist cash cow, taxing cargo, extorting businesses, and raiding local banks for billions of rials. For more than a year, AQAP controlled long stretches of the southern coast and operated like a miniature state. Today, they've got thousands of fighters operating across 5 Yemeni provinces. The U.S. has conducted hundreds of drone strikes in the region, killing plenty of AQAP leaders, and yet they are still operational. A second front was quietly taking shape thousands of miles away. It's in West Africa's Sahel region where Al-Qaeda is experiencing the biggest growth. In 2017, 4 militant groups merged to form JNIM under the Al-Qaeda umbrella. JNIM has built a shadow presence across the region, moving into places where governments barely operate, especially rural Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. In Burkina Faso alone, roughly a third of the country is now under the control or heavy influence of jihadist and armed groups. Millions now live in areas where the state has effectively disappeared. Violence has surged year after year, and JNIM helps to fund its operations by tapping into the region's booming illicit economies like gold smuggling and protection rackets. The result is a hybrid organization, part insurgency, part criminal enterprise, and it's quietly expanding its footprint across one of the world's fastest-growing conflict zones. From 2014 to 2022, France deployed 3,000 troops and spent over €500 million annually on Operation Barkhane. They killed several dozen operational leaders and emirs of various Al-Qaeda-linked groups. The result? JNIM was stronger in 2022 than when France arrived. Al-Shabaab had been fighting in Somalia since 2006, and it is still going strong. At its height, it controlled major cities like Mogadishu and Kismayo. Even today, it dominates large stretches of rural southern Somalia, despite years of U.S. and Somali attacks. Estimates of its manpower run into the several thousands. But what makes Al-Shabaab uniquely durable is its shadow state economy. The group operates a sophisticated taxation and extortion system that targets everything under the sun, generating well over $100 million a year. In many areas, construction companies and traders literally pay taxes to both the Somali government and Al-Shabaab. And that's all because the militants' collectors actually show up. They've survived an Ethiopian invasion, African Union peacekeeping forces, and 31 U.S.-verified airstrikes in 2019 alone. They've carried out devastating attacks like the 2017 Mogadishu truck bomb that killed over 500 people. In a lot of ways, this decentralized version of Al-Qaeda is actually more dangerous than the one that attacked on 9/11. In 2001, there was one Al-Qaeda central. Today, there are 5 major affiliates and dozens of active cells. AQAP alone has had several different leaders since 2009, and they are still operational. The average time to replace a killed leader? 2 to 3 months. The key difference from ISIS is that al Qaeda's militants are mostly local. In other words, they can't just go home when things get tough, they are home. Ask the world's major powers and they'll tell you that they can easily kill an invasion force, but you can't kill an insurgency that is homegrown. Al-Shabaab has been operating for 19 years, AQAP for 16 years. ISIS's caliphate lasted 3 years. Slow and steady does not win races, but it does win wars of attrition. The intelligence challenge remains real. Between 2014 and 2017, about the vast majority of counterterrorism resources were focused on ISIS. Al-Qaeda used that window to expand quietly across Africa and Yemen. JNIM formed during the peak of ISIS hysteria, and barely anyone noticed. Today, the U.S. counterterrorism budget has plunged from its 2008 peak. Drone strikes have dropped across the Middle East, mostly because the threat has shifted. It's spread abroad, and you can't watch everywhere at once. 20-plus years later, the battlefield looks nothing like it did in 2001, but al-Qaeda is still there. It remains a globally active network with numerous affiliates, sustained finances, and influence across multiple regions. Strategically, they're thinking in decades, not years, playing the longest game in terrorism history. They're betting that governments will fail faster than they need to conquer them, and for now, that bet seems shockingly safe to make. Since 9/11, the U.S. has killed thousands of al-Qaeda operatives and spent trillions on counterterrorism. Yet today, al-Qaeda's affiliates control more territory and fighters than in 2001. The West keeps declaring victory. Bin Laden died in 2011, and al-Qaeda is finished, and ISIS was defeated in 2019, and jihad is over. And now, in 2025, people are starting to wonder why we keep hearing about al-Qaeda in Africa. They collapsed as a centralized organization, but returned as a decentralized network. The franchise model worked. They haven't hit the U.S. homeland since 2001, but they've embedded themselves across Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. They can survive leadership losses and regional setbacks. They're not bigger, not louder, just harder to kill. In the end, al-Qaeda learned the simplest rule of insurgency: survive long enough and the world will lose focus before you do. Now watch how SEAL Team took down Osama bin
Hey, what
Laden
y'all
minute by
thinking, man?
minute.
What y'all thinking, man? Infographic, man. You learn something new every day, man. Let's get it. Shoot, 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 man. I'm gonna edit that little part out before we let's go.